Hello there. I've been reading the story of Moses meeting with God in the early part of Exodus and the lead up to it when Joseph long died and the people had increased in Egypt and a new Pharaoh was on the throne, and all that business about killing the firstborn males of the Israelites and so on, and the oppression and the making of bricks and all of that, and how Moses murders an overseer and runs away in fear of his life, and settles in Midian and marries the daughter of Jethro, and called Zipporah, and has children, and he's away for 40 years, and he's a shepherd in the wilderness. That's the story I've been reading. And then there's that wonderful moment when Moses is just on a mountain, on Mount Horeb, and he sees the burning bush, the bush that was burning but not consumed, and he meets with God, and God tells him his name, that he is I am who I am, and that he's going to send him to the Pharaoh, to tell the Pharaoh to let the people go. And he gives him the miracles of the staff turning to a snake, and his hand in his clothing, and then out leprous and then cured again. And Moses insists all the way through that he can't speak and he needs a spokesman. He can't speak, and even though God says to him, well, I made your mouth, I'm perfectly capable of helping you to speak. You go and speak. He says, I can't. And the Lord says, I'll give you Aaron, your brother, and he will speak for you. And that's wonderful. And we know that story so well. But there's a little phrase that comes up in a moment that I'm going to read. It's from Exodus 4, verse 27. So Moses has met with the Lord and he's gone home, and there's been this very peculiar incident with his wife and circumcision and so on. And he's gone to his father-in-law and said, I've got to go back to Egypt. He tells him what's happened, and asks his permission to go, virtually, because he worked for Jethro. And so he's about to go, and he's on his way to Egypt. And you have to remember again that it is 40 years since Moses fled from Egypt. And we don't get much impression of the life of Moses in Egypt beforehand, that he ever knew his family or had anything to do with his family. He was living in the Pharaoh's household as the son of the Pharaoh's daughter, a high up Egyptian, and his family were living amongst the slaves there. And then in verse 27 of Exodus 4, it says this: the Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. And carries on. So he went and met him at the mountain of God and kissed him. Now, I think that's amazing. We focus very often on the encounter of Moses with God at the burning bush that wasn't consumed. But here is Moses' older brother, Aaron. And God simply says to him, go into the wilderness and meet Moses. And in that entire wilderness, Aaron is told exactly where to go to meet with Moses. He doesn't wander around the wilderness looking for him. He goes straight to the mountain of God, which is where Moses had been when he met with God. But he'd gone home, spoken to Jethro, and journeyed brought his family back. But the two of them met on the same place on the mountain where Moses had met with God. And then Moses tells Aaron all about what God had said to him, and Moses begins to journey into Egypt with Aaron as his spokesperson. But the Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. I think that's wonderful. Maybe you don't see the amazingness of it. We get no impression of any resentment from Aaron that Moses had it easy. The years he was growing up, the 40 years he was growing up in Pharaoh's household, all the education he had, all the comfort he had, and the difficulty that Aaron had lived with all his life. And then 40 years of silence, 40 years of Moses having gone, and I'm sure Aaron would have known that Moses had killed an Egyptian. I don't think it would have been a secret. There's no evidence that Pharaoh sent anyone searching for his adopted son or anything like that. Moses was cast out of Egypt, and Aaron and his family would have known about it. He would have known all about the bulrushes and the basket, and the fact that his brother had been nursed by his mother and so on. There's no evidence anywhere of any resentment in Aaron's heart. He just heard God tell him what to do, and he did it. It's beautiful. To me, that is wonderful. Moses didn't have to go into Egypt and find his brother to be his spokesperson. God did that. God brought the two men back together again for the work that he'd appointed for them. And when I read this, and I think, Lord, you are capable of speaking to someone miles away and getting them to the place they need to be to meet the next person on their journey with you, to be prompted to do the next thing that you have for them. You are the great organizer. You speak, and people do. You spoke to Aaron, and he journeyed out of Egypt into the wilderness to meet someone he'd not seen for 40 years. God is amazing in what he can do. Don't ever underestimate what God can do. That's my thought for the day. Have a great day. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.